In this video we're going to take a look at how we can start to paint some of the skin texture on this character that we've got. So if I hop on over to ZBrush and load this up, I've made a project to where you can actually have all the sculpting kind of done, and if you just want to kind of learn about poly painting, you can follow along with this content. So actually that just sits under, if you go to File and open one of the ZBrush projects, within the folder structure that I have a ZBrush project files, and you can go in there and there's a Fling version 3 no pose and no color.zpr. You can go ahead and open that up. It might take a little bit of time to open it up. I think the file is about 500 megs or so. So that will be the file that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to switch over real quick to Photoshop. And in an earlier video we took a look at how we can set up color swatches. So I'm just going to go to File, Open, and then within the folder structure that I've given for this, there's a ZBrush swatch quads. I'm going to open that up, go to the PSD JPEG folder, and open up this ZBrush swatch quad basic. And so in the earlier video I just showed you how I was using Adobe Cooler. We went to Window, Extensions, and went to the Cooler, and we're able to use this to kind of pick different color harmonies. So I think I was going to try the triad. I'm going to try some different colors on this character this time. So I'm just going to kind of move this around a little bit. I don't want to get super saturated with the colors that I have. Let me see if I can pull this one in and change this one just a little bit. This will actually kind of lighten this up, just because I wasn't super happy with the color that it was producing. So you can kind of drag all these things out, and it's going to give you some different colors to work with. So from here, with the Photoshop file that I have, I was just able to just double click on each one of these solid color layers that I've made, and then I can just click and drag out to this to change the colors of that. So let's drag out here, hit OK, go here, I'm going to drag over here like that, and I'll just have two more to finish off to get the colors for that. Okay, so I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to say File Save As, so I'm going to do Control-Shift-S, and then I'm going to give this a name. Let's call this like Class Demo. Okay, I'll save that. I've already got one named that, so I'm just going to replace that real quick. And then I'm going to save a JPEG version of this. So I'll hit Control Shift S again, and then I'm going to drop this down to JPEG. Just save out a JPEG version of this. I already had one, so I'm going to just overwrite that. And these are the options I was using for JPEG. So now that I got that set, I was going to go back over to ZBrush, and I have another video where I kind of went over how we can use Spotlight to load in some of these different swatches. So I'm going to open up the Texture tab, click this and dock this over here. I'm going to go to the Texture tab. I'm going to say Import right here, and then I'm going to navigate to the Swatch Quads area, and I'm going to pick this swatch that I made for the class demo. So I'm going to have to, after it's imported in, I'm going to have to go here and actually select it so you can see it's available here. Then I can go ahead and add that to Spotlight. So I've added that to Spotlight. We don't need the light box, so we can tap the command key to get rid of that. And then I can just scale this thing down and then click and drag and move that over. And then the opacity of this, you can see if I have this over the model, it's not 100% opaque. So I'm going to find the opacity slider here and click and drag that to where it's 100% like that. So now we've got a swatch that is set at 100%, and I can just push this up off to the side over here. Okay. The other thing I showed is that once this tool is up, we can click and drag out, and then we can pick colors from this as if it's a color swatch. If we tap Z, it's going to hide this ring that we have, and you won't be able to pick colors if that tool is not up. So we just have to tap Z, and if you want this whole thing to go away, you tap Shift Z, and that's going to turn this on and off. You can see how it's turning this on and off. So that's how we're kind of using these different tools. I'm going to click and drag out to what I'm going to consider maybe his primary color for his skin. And then I don't need this color swatch anymore, so I'm just going to hit Shift Z. I'm going to be painting on the body, so I don't really need to view everything else because this scene is pretty heavy. So if I try to rotate it, you can see it's going to take a little bit of time for it to calculate what it needs to do before it starts to rotate, and then it's kind of chunky as it moves around. That's just because there's a lot of different pieces in here, a lot of different polys. So to kind of work around that and kind of work a little faster, if we go to Subtool, I'm going to make sure that the body is actually selected. I can go ahead and hit this solo button, and then you can see it's going to isolate just the body, and then it's going to allow us to move a lot quicker in the program. So I want to go ahead and fill this with a color. So to start off, I'm going to go ahead and turn on RGB. I've got it on my standard brush, so to get there you just hit tap B and then tap S, and you should be able to find your standard brush within here. The hotkey for that is T. So once I've got it on the standard brush, I'm just going to put it on RGB. I'm not going to be sculpting on this, so I'm going to go ahead and turn Z add off. This way I can just go ahead and draw on the model, and I should be able to add some color. So I can tap X and I can have symmetry turned on. You can see my brush has got a little red line following it. That means lazy mouse is turned on, so I can tap L to turn on or off lazy mouse depending on how you want to paint. So if I want to fill the entire object, I can go up to color and say fill object, and it's just going to fill the entire object. It's going to flood it with whatever this color is here. And you might want to pay attention to this alternate colors by Alt key. I've been noticing sometimes that's been turned on, and that's been kind of throwing me off. If you have this alternate on, you should be painting with this secondary color that you have here. And if I hold down Alt, then it's going to do what it says, where it's actually going to paint with this alternate color. But I've noticed situations where that's just not exactly working correctly for me. So if things aren't behaving the way that you would expect, just go ahead and turn this alternate key off, and you should always be painting when this is your primary color and this is your secondary color. Okay, so I could actually hit Shift Z and then tap Z to bring this back up, and if I switch my colors here, this could be my my secondary color. I can click and drag this out and pick this purple color. I'm going to maybe try that for some of the skin that he has for his stomach and things like that. And then once that's set, then I'll just hit Shift Z to take that swatch away. And I can hit the switch color, so it's going to move these two around. I'll turn the alternate on and then paint. I'll hold on Alt and kind of paint with this and see if this is working here. Okay, so once you have some colors established on your model, you can actually just click and drag out to your model, and you can pick colors directly off of what you see on the model, the colors that are painted here. So if I wanted to paint back in some of this green, then it would be really easy for me to just kind of grab that, and I want to kind of have his stomach area just really kind of confined to some of this plates that you kind of see on here, and it kind of moves underneath the character and all the way back up his tail and his spine. So I'm going to kind of paint some of this stuff out, and if I want to paint with the other color, I'll hold down Alt and I'll paint with the blue. I'm going to turn off my lazy mouse, so I just tap L, and so I'm going to keep painting on here. I want to paint his eyes and his snout a color. So this is completely up to you how you want to kind of approach painting this thing. The next thing I wanted to show you after I kind of have some of this stuff roughed out is that we can hold down Shift and we can actually smooth out the paint on here. But if we hold down Shift, you'll notice that smooth is going to have its own options. So Z add is turned on for that, which will actually smooth out the model like that whenever I smooth the colors. I don't want that. I'm going to hit undo. So if I hold down Shift, I can turn off the Z add. And now whenever I hold down Shift, I can actually smooth out some of these colors up and through here, and it's kind of like a blur brush. at that point. Another thing to note is that we are painting, we're doing the poly painting. It is, you don't have to have UVs to paint this way, but what it is dependent on is how much geometry you have in the model. So if I go to the geometry section, we're under tool, and we go to the geometry section and we take a look at the subdivision levels that we have. If we drop that all the way down, you can see that it's actually coloring individual polys at that point. So I could hold down shift and I could smooth this thing out, and you can see how it's going to have a pretty big effect on how much it's smoothing this thing out. But it's actually taking each polygon and trying to give it a color, and it kind of smooths in between each one of those. So as I step up in my subdivision levels and get more geometry, it's basically like I'm having more pixels to play with. If you think of a map that we might be painting in like Photoshop, the subdivision levels act as if you're increasing or decreasing the document size inside of Photoshop. So if you kind of think of that way, that's kind of how you're getting this different resolution here. So I'm going to hold down Alt again and start painting this inside of here. Like this. And I want to paint the underside of the hands like this. Let me see what I got. Oops. I need to hold down Alt. Yeah. So I want to paint the underside of the hands, but I don't want to paint through the model. So you can see if I'm painting something that's really thin like this, it just kind of pushes all the way through the model. We don't want that to happen, at least I don't. So I'm going to go into the brush settings, and I'm going to click and drag this little thing over to the trough so we can look at the options for brush. And if we go to this auto masking area, we can see that there is this back face mask. So go ahead and turn that on. And now whenever I paint with the secondary color, I'm going to hold down Alt, I should be able to paint the bottoms of the hands, and you can see how it's not going to paint up on the top of the hand. So that's the way I'd like to be painting. So you can actually turn that on, and that might help you in some different situations. But you might have a case where you do want to paint through the model, so just be aware that turning this on or off is going to give you some different behavior for how you actually paint on the model. Okay, so I'm going to keep painting up and through here like this a little bit. The other thing I kind of wanted to show is that we can turn on this cavity mask, and if we do that, this is a pretty cool feature. If you've ever done any kind of dry brushing in real world painting, it's kind of like you get paint on the end of your brush and it's not very wet, it's kind of dry, that's why they call it dry brush, but then you can kind of brush lightly on a surface and it leaves all the cracks like a darker color, and maybe you want to paint a lighter color on here. So I can click and drag out on the arm to kind of pick that color, and then I'll push over here, I'll push this up a little bit to give a lighter color. Now whenever I start to paint on here, you can see how it's going to lighten the skin, and it's giving us this kind of look as if we're doing some dry brushing on the model. So I can really kind of pull out some of these different scales and kind of pull out some of these features. Okay. You might notice though that this can give you some kind of results that look a little pixelated, and what I usually do to combat that is I kind of just hold down the shift key and just kind of lightly brush on this, and it'll kind of smooth some of those details out. So I'll just keep just tapping along here through this area and kind of get this softened up just a little bit. If you ever want to check your model and just see exactly what's going on with it color-wise, if you switch off this material and you go to the flat color, you can switch this. I think I've filled this object with a material. So to get rid of anything I've filled material-wise, just like we can paint with color, we can also paint with a material. So this is just material, this is RGB, and this is material with RGB. So I could just try to paint on this thing with the material, but instead of doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and say color, say fill object, like that. So now I'm able to see exactly what I'm getting color-wise with this. So I'll go ahead and put this back to, I have this skin shade 4, and it's a little bit of a custom shader that I made. It's just got a little bit of a rim over the skin material, but this default skin shade 4 material should be fairly nice for you to paint with. Okay, so I'm going to put this back on RGB. Now this way I can go switch back between these two shaders that I have and just always be checking the color. I might want to drag out here and then push it this direction. You can see I can add a little more saturation to this. I just want to see what this might look like if I had the skin a little more saturated instead of like pushing towards a whitish color. Not completely sold on that. So I guess I will just keep it kind of this lighter color here. And I could just really quickly paint in on some of this just to give it a little bit more color. So this is how we can use the cavity masking, and we can kind of lighten the skin, but what if we wanted to darken those cracks instead and kind of go the opposite direction? That's going to be possible for us as well. And basically I'm just going to take this slider next to cavity mask, and it's on a +10. So if I take that and drag it to a -10, I'll just hit enter on that. Now I can drag out to the color of the skin, and I can just drag down this direction, make it a little more saturated and a little bit darker. Now when I paint, you can see I can really paint in those cracks. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of hit this lightly. I don't want to go too crazy with this, and then usually after I paint just a little bit, then I'm just going to kind of tap holding shift so I can kind of smooth out some of the results. And that's usually kind of the way that I sculpt in this program anyways. I kind of usually build a surface up or knock it back and then hold down shift and just kind of smooth out the results a little bit. So that seems to work fairly well for painting as well. So let's keep hitting some of this. And to me this this purple color is highly saturated, so I'm going to hit the switch color here. I'm going to drag down. Actually, I'm going to click this and drag out from here. I'm going to lighten this a little bit, push it up this way, and then I'm going to take the cavity mask and put it to a +10. That way I can kind of start hitting some of the shapes on these plates and lighten this a little bit, kind of brighten this up. Like that. So I'll just hit underneath here as well. And I can run this up and through here. So we've got some muscle structure, so let's try to hit the highlight for that, and maybe going down the center of this as well. So you can see it's producing some nice kind of shading for these different cracks that they have here. Let's kind of lighten this up down on the bottom, and also at the his snout. Just holding down shift and kind of knocking some of that back after I paint with that. So you can kind of hit some of this as well, kind of lighten that just a little bit. Something else I like to do, you can see these are the eye sockets. Obviously we're not looking at the eyes, but I like to add some darkness in like these eye sockets to where it should bleed out a little bit, and we can actually see that color coming through whenever the eyeball's there. Maybe get a little bit of dark shading through there. So I'll just drag out and pick that purple color and then pull down and get it kind of nice and dark and through there. So I'll just actually turn off cavity masking for this. Just make sure it's not pushing back through the other to the other side. And try to get some nice dark shading. Hit undo. Just because I want to keep it confined within this area. Kind of like that. And I'll turn off the solo button just to bring everything back. I only want to look at the eyes, but so it's going to take just a second to bring that back. So we could use the solo button. That's one way of working. Another way of working is we can go to the subtool palette, and if you want to turn everything off except for what you're working with, you can hold down Shift and click on this little eye icon. It's going to hide everything else. Now if I want to work with the eyes alongside of the body, I can just go ahead and click this visibility on there while the body's selected. So now I can see the eyes along with everything else. So that might be something I want to do. So that's a different way of working. And so I'm just going to kind of lightly hit around here because I just, like I said, I want to get this kind of dark shading around the eyes. Kind of like that. Okay. And I think this is going to look, you know, quite a bit different whenever I color the eyes. We could just throw a color on the eyes pretty quickly. I'm going to hit Shift Z to bring this back and see if there's anything we can pull from here. Tap Z to bring up this ring. I'm going to go ahead and just steal this color real quick. I'll turn that off, and then I'm just going to fill the eyes. I'm going to say color, fill object, and we'll do this color here and see what that might look like. So I think I'll leave it like that. I'll probably push it a little bit lighter and maybe add some some lightness to this. So if I want to paint with the eyes and actually be painting on that, then I can turn on the visibility of the body to see those two things together. So I'm not going to do much with the eyes right now. I'll just kind of lighten them a little bit more from the front, like that. Okay, so I'm just going to push that like that. I'll put it back on the body. Let's see, what else would I like to do with this character? So he does have some plating kind of running down through his back. So I will steal some color from here and just push just a little bit of color through there. I'm not going to do much. And just kind of smooth out some of the results for that. Now one thing I could do is keep it on this purple color. We've been painting with RGB intensity set to 100. So if I just paint, you can see it's going to be 100%, right? So with this slider, we can drag this down and we can kind of more lightly paint on this. Let me drag it down even really kind of low, like to 4 or 5, and then you can kind of see it's acting more like kind of an airbrush at that point, where you can kind of slowly build up some color. So if I take this and drag this from this purple, I'll get it a darker color. I want it less saturated, and I was going to use this to kind of just give a little shading for some of the muscle structures that I see here. I don't want to hit it too much, but just start to exaggerate some of these things just a little bit. Paint in through here. So this is adding, you know, kind of like baked in lighting if you think of it that way, but so I don't want to get too heavy-handed with this. So I do have to be a little careful with what I'm doing on this. And I might go back to the brush settings and turn on this cavity mask and then push it negative so I'm painting in the cracks of this thing. That way I can kind of give some shading, but it's not affecting the highlights at that point. So you're going to have to experiment with turning the cavity masking on and off. There's going to be times where you're going to want to use the cavity masking, but then times when you're not. So you're going to have to kind of get used to turning that on and off to get the kind of desired result that you're looking for. So let me drag out here. I got a little too much paint on the top of his foot here that I like to get rid of, like this. And also, if you think about something being in nature, you think about our own human skin, and if the sunlight is hitting this area, it's gonna, produce maybe a darker tan, and it's usually kind of a lighter color on the underside. So we could pick some of this lightness here, and I could paint on the inner part of the arm like this. I might want to turn the intensity up a little bit more. Here's also where I might want to isolate just the arms, just so I'm looking at those. So if I hold down Control and Shift and drag a marquee out to about here, it should just show me that part of the model. If I hold down Control and Shift, drag a marquee, and add the Alt modifier to that, I can take away from that. Sorry about that. I'm getting some drawing things from Camtasia. Okay, so I'm just going to try to isolate this a little bit better. So I'll hold down Control Shift and drag this out again to about here. And I could use the lasso. So if I hold on Control Shift, I can click in here, and I could use the selection lasso. So it's going to be giving me the same options, but I can actually draw out exactly what that shape is. So then I can kind of isolate the arms here. That wouldn't be an issue if I wasn't using Camtasia and getting some of these notation things on the screen. So I'll have to fix that in the options. So I'm going to hold on Control Shift and then put this back to the selection rectangle after I'm done with that. But now it will be a little bit easier for me to get inside here and kind of paint some of this color for the arms that it might have been a little more difficult for me to get to before if I was looking at the entire model. So to bring back the entire model, I can just hold down Control Shift, just click in the open viewport one time, and it should bring everything back. So I might want to do the same kind of thing to the inside of the legs. Just don't want to go too heavy-handed with it. Just like that. And maybe I'll just go ahead and hit some of these shapes already right now to start differentiating these shapes. So these are kind of like these horn structures on his head. Like so. And maybe this is a case where, I don't know, maybe I want to pull in some of this color that I had from that color swatch and see what these shapes look like as this color. And I actually kind of like that, so I'm going to start pushing these towards this color here. So I think that's kind of looking kind of cool. So something else that I haven't shown you guys is that we can change the stroke type on the standard brush to drag rectangle, and we can choose any one of the alphas that we have on here. Let's say I want to choose this alpha 23, and then maybe I'll steal some of the dark shading maybe in through here. Now if I click and drag out, you can see I'm going to make these kind of cool looking spots on the model. If it's too heavy handed, we can always drop down the intensity, and you want to find kind of the right balance between, you know, having these things being represented on the skin but not just being completely and totally overpowering. So I'm just going to keep dragging this stuff out, trying to make the skin just look a little more interesting. So you can try these different alphas. You can see it's going to give you, you know, quite a bit of different effects depending on what you choose here. This is alpha 58. If I click and drag out, it's going to give me some of these nice, really kind of thin lines, kind of like these veins or marbling kind of an effect. And again, you can turn on cavity masking. You could have that work with the cavity mask. So like maybe I just want this these kind of veins to go run through the cracks that I have here. You could use that. I'm going to put it back onto, where was I at? Alpha 23? Yep. And I'll turn off the cavity masking. And I'll keep painting some of these kind of like skin freckles or so. You might want to build up a little bit darker shading around the elbow area. And maybe a little bit darker on the kneecap area. Something else that we haven't really been doing is sculpting with any of this stuff. So if I turn Z add on, I can pull out color and I can be sculpting all at the same time. So if you wanted to kind of raise the surface up just a little bit while you're doing this, I can play with the Z intensity to get the right effect that I'm kind of going for on this. So you can sculpt and paint all at the same time, and I think that's a extremely useful feature that ZBrush has, and it's something that I really enjoy about the program is the fact that you could actually sculpt and paint all at the same time. Okay, I'm going to turn the Z add off. Let me try real quick with this spray. I'm going to see what kind of results we'll get from that. Spray is actually kind of acts like an airbrush where a bunch of chunks of particles just kind of shoot out. And within spray there's a placement, so we can drag that up and that's going to widen out the spread of how far these things kind of shoot out. If I change it from this alpha to a really small one like the alpha 40, you can see kind of the effect. Let me pump this up a little bit so we can see exactly what's going on here. So with that placement, I set it to 1. It's really giving a nice spread for this, how much this is shooting out. I've made it a little bit darker so we can see that. I think I need to just kind of find the sweet spot for how dark those things should be. But I can kind of shoot out these little particles on the body and add some more kind of spots to that thing. Kind of like that. And I'm going to go ahead and put it back to the freehand and then turn my alpha off. I'm going to go ahead and grab some of this color here. I think in the bottom of this, maybe I might want to lighten this a little bit more. Turn on cavity masking, put that to +10. Just make sure I've lightened this as much as what I think it should kind of be in this area. Okay. And it just feels like it's pretty dark. Around his mouth too. So I'm going to try to lighten that up just a little bit. I do like the purple color, it's just seems like it's a bit strong. Okay, I think it's starting to get there. So I'm not using the latest version of ZBrush. I will be switching over to that shortly. I just had to kind of keep this project in 4R4 just because of the students that I was working with. They didn't have access to the latest and greatest version, but the newest version does have this auto file save on there that's really nice. So that's a nice feature to have. So I should probably stop this video and go ahead and save this project. I'll start making myself a temp file project that I'll work with throughout this thing, but definitely make sure that you're saving often and that you've got multiple versions, especially with this poly painting. If you want to try something kind of bold and you are concerned about, you know, making the kind of changes, they do have this nice undo feature where you can kind of step back through the model and check out the undos from the model. So that's a possibility, but you might also want to just save a version of your model off, and then then you can kind of go to town on this other version of it and see what results you come up with. If you like it, then you can keep moving forward. If not, then you can just kind of step backwards. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and give a name to this, and what I like to do is give a name with color like this, and then just put like _001. That way I can have up to 999 saved versions, and sometimes I get to a point where I will be saving like hundreds of versions of that file. So that's just some kind of file saving structure that's kind of worked for me over the years, so you might want to give that a try if you're naming your files and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm gonna just keep working on this model off to the side, and when we come back to the next section you might see a little bit more done to it, but these are the basic tools that I would be using to paint this creature. Okay.